The neon sign outside had been dying for weeks. It flickered every few minutes. Precious Bites Diner losing letters until it read something nonsensical, then catching itself and buzzing back to life. Chizara had stopped noticing it the way you stop noticing a scar. It was just part of the place now. Part of her. She spread her tips across the counter at 2:58 a.m. after the last trucker had gone. 5 bills. A few coins. She lined them up and counted slowly, moving her lips without making a sound, the way her mother had taught her to pray. It came to $11.40. Her rent was $400. She gathered the money back into her apron pocket and stood very still for a moment, looking at the empty diner, the red vinyl stools, the sticky salt shakers, the coffee machine that coughed more than it poured. She had scrubbed every surface twice tonight. The floors were clean. The menus were stacked. Everything was in order, which was a funny thing because nothing in her life was. She was still standing there, somewhere between tired and defeated, when the bell above the door made its thin, single chime. The man came in slowly. That was the first thing she noticed. Not his size, not his suit, not the fact that it was nearly 3 in the morning. She noticed that he moved like someone doing math, calculating how much each step was going to cost him, deciding it was still worth it, and paying anyway. He was tall. His suit was black and well fitted in the way that expensive things are fitted, like it had been made for his body specifically. But the left side of the jacket was ruined. Dark and wet, the fabric sticking to his ribs in a way that had nothing to do with rain. He reached the counter and sat down on the stool at the far end, away from the window. His back was straight. His face gave nothing away. But his hands, when he placed them flat on the counter, had a faint tremor in the fingers. The kind that comes not from nerves, but from blood loss. Chizara looked at those hands. Then she looked at his face. He was maybe 40, with the kind of features that had once been handsome and were now just severe. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that moved once around the room. Checking exits, she realized, not admiring the decor, before settling on the laminated menu in front of him. He stared at it like he was reading it, but his eyes weren't moving. He wasn't reading. He was just holding still. She had seen hunger before. She had grown up next to it, worked beside it, felt it herself on the long Wednesdays before payday. But this man's hunger was different. It wasn't the hunger of an empty stomach. It was deeper than that. It lived in the set of his shoulders and the locked line of his jaw. It was the hunger of a person who had been running so long they had forgotten what it felt like to simply sit. She picked up her pen. She did not ask him if he was okay. She did not look at the small, dark drip that had fallen from his jacket onto the clean floor she had just mopped. She did not reach for the phone behind the counter, even though a part of her brain was quietly listing reasons why she should. Instead, she placed a glass of water in front of him. She filled it to the top. "The house special," she said, clicking her pen against her pad. "Jollof rice, fried plantain, and a boiled egg. It's the best thing on the menu." She paused. "It's also the only thing left in the kitchen at this hour, so." The man's eyes moved from the menu to her face. They were dark and flat and careful. The eyes of someone who had learned a long time ago not to trust kindness. She met his gaze without blinking. "I don't have," he started. His voice was low and slightly rough, like gravel shifting. "I know," Chizara said simply. She turned and walked toward the kitchen, tucking her notepad into her apron. Behind her, for the first time in what felt like years, Lorenzo Ricci said nothing at all. The rice was good. Lorenzo hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected much of anything from a diner with a flickering sign and 4 empty stools. But the plate Chizara set in front of him smelled like something warm and deliberate, like someone had actually thought about it. The jollof rice was deep orange red, smoky at the edges. The plantain was soft and sweet. The boiled egg sat to the side like a quiet afterthought. He picked up the fork slowly, aware of the pull in his ribs every time he moved his left arm. He ate. Chizara moved around the diner doing small closing tasks, wiping the coffee machine, refilling the sugar holders, not watching him. He noticed that. Most people, when they were trying not to stare, still stared. She genuinely wasn't looking. She was just sharing the space with him, the way you share a room with someone you've known a long time. It made him uneasy in a way he couldn't name. "You cook this?" he asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. She glanced over from the counter. "Every night. The cook goes home at midnight. After that, it's just me. It's good." "I know," she said without pride. "Just fact." He almost smiled. Almost. He ate in silence for another minute, and then, because the food was doing something to him, loosening something he had kept tightly wound for years, he said, "Quiet city tonight." Chizara leaned against the counter and looked toward the dark window. Outside, the street was empty. A single traffic light blinked yellow at the intersection, on and off, like it was thinking. "It's never really quiet," she said. "You just can't hear the noise at this hour. It's still happening. People still losing things. Still making bad choices." She paused. "The city just pulls a curtain over it at night, so the rest of us can sleep." Lorenzo looked at her. "You sound like you've thought about that a lot." "I work the 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift 5 nights a week," she said simply. "You think about things." He looked back at his plate. "What kinds of things?" She was quiet for a moment, tucking a cloth under the counter. "Ghosts, mostly." The word landed in the room and stayed there. "Not real ones," she added. "I mean the ones people leave behind." A regular used to sit on that stool. She nodded toward the second seat from the left. "Every Thursday. Large coffee, no sugar. Scrambled eggs." Then one Thursday he just didn't come. Never came back. She shrugged one shoulder. "But I still see him there sometimes. Just for a second. Before I remember." Lorenzo was very still. "This city is full of those," she continued. "Ghosts of people who used to be somewhere. Used to mean something to somebody." She looked at him directly then, calm and even. "You look like you might have a few of those yourself." Any other person who had said something like that to him, who had looked at him that closely, that openly, would have found the conversation ending in a way they didn't enjoy. Lorenzo had built his entire life on the principle that people who looked too closely paid for it. But there was nothing threatening in her eyes. No hidden angle. No fear either. Which was the strangest part. People always had fear. It came in different sizes, the big trembling kind. The small careful kind that hid behind smiles and yes sirs. But it was always there when they looked at him. Always. She was just looking at him. Like he was a person sitting in a diner eating rice at 3 in the morning, which, right now, was exactly what he was. Something about that felt enormous. "You're not scared of me," he said. It came out sounding almost confused. Chizara picked up her cloth again and wiped a clean section of the counter that didn't need wiping. "Should I be?" Lorenzo thought about that honestly. About what he was. About the men who were, right now, somewhere in this city, looking for him with very clear instructions. About what they would do to anyone nearby when they found him. "Probably," he said quietly. Chizara nodded slowly, like she was filing that information away. "Finish your food," she said. "It's getting cold." Chizara heard them before she saw them. That was the thing about silence. Real silence, the kind that meant something. Had a texture to it. It was different from the ordinary quiet of a sleeping street. Ordinary quiet was soft. It had small sounds inside it. A distant car, a dog somewhere. The hum of the city's electrical wires doing their invisible work. Ordinary quiet was alive. This was not that. This silence was a held breath. It pressed against the diner windows like a hand laid flat against glass. Every small background sound the night had been making simply stopped. The way birds stop singing before a storm. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had lifted a needle from a record. Chizara went still at the coffee machine. Her father had told her about this once. He had grown up in a town where trouble arrived quietly, and he had learned to read that quiet the way other men read weather. When everything stops making noise at the same time, he had said, that means something has decided to move through, and it doesn't want to be heard first. He had called it predatory silence. She had been 12 years old and had not fully understood him then. She understood him now. She set down the coffee pot without making a sound and looked toward the window. The parking lot outside held 4 spaces and a broken light pole that hadn't worked since August. At this hour it was usually empty, washed in the thin yellow glow from the diner's own sign. She could normally see straight through to the road. She couldn't see the road now. 3 black SUVs sat across the parking lot entrance, side by side, wide and heavy like a wall that had decided to park itself. They had no headlights, no engine sound. They had arrived the way serious things arrive, without announcing themselves, without giving you the chance to prepare. Nobody got out. That was worse than if they had. Chizara turned from the window slowly, the way her body understood to move before her mind had finished forming the thought. She looked at Lorenzo. He had already stopped eating. He was sitting with the fork resting against the edge of the plate, his dark eyes on the window. and his entire body had changed in a way that was hard to describe but impossible to miss. A moment ago, he had been a wounded man eating rice. Now he was something else entirely. His stillness was no longer the stillness of exhaustion. It was the stillness of a person who had lived inside dangerous moments long enough to know exactly how they began. His jaw tightened once. "How many doors in this building?" he asked. His voice was low and completely flat. "Front door," Chizara said, keeping her own voice steady. "Back door through the kitchen. One window in the bathroom, but it's painted shut and faces the alley. The alley connects to the road, loops back to the parking lot on the other end." Lorenzo was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "They'll have that covered." Chizara looked at him. "You know who they are." It wasn't a question. "Yes." "Are they here for you?" "Yes." She nodded once, short and clean, like she was accepting a piece of information she would deal with properly later. Her heart was moving fast inside her chest, but her hands were not shaking, which surprised her slightly. "How long do we have?" she asked. "They're waiting on a signal," Lorenzo said, his eyes still on the window. "Someone's telling them whether I'm in here or not, which means someone's watching the front." He paused. 2 minutes. Maybe 3. Chizara untied her apron. She folded it neatly, which was perhaps a strange thing to do in that moment, but her mother had raised her to finish what she started, and she had been in the middle of folding it when the silence arrived. She set it on the counter. Then she looked at Lorenzo Ricci, the most dangerous man she had ever stood 3 feet away from, bleeding quietly onto her clean floor. "There's a walk-in cooler in the back of the kitchen," she said. "Big enough. Cold enough that it'll slow the bleeding too." Lorenzo looked at her steadily. "You don't have to. I already fed you," Chizara said, picking up her keys from the counter. "I'm not about to waste a good plate of rice." She walked toward the kitchen without looking back, and after a moment, she heard his footsteps follow. The walk-in cooler smelled like cold metal and raw onions. Lorenzo stepped inside without a word, and Chizara pulled the heavy door almost shut behind him, leaving a gap no wider than 2 fingers. Enough air, not enough light to show from the outside. She had stacked a full shelf of frozen meat packs against the inner wall. Shoulder height, the way she stacked them every closing shift. Nobody would think twice about it. Nobody would look behind it. She pressed 2 clean dish towels into Lorenzo's hands. For the ribs, she whispered. He took them without argument, which told her he was in more pain than he had been showing. She pulled the door to its almost closed position and walked back into the kitchen, keeping her footsteps light and even. She had 30 seconds. She used them well. She turned the kitchen radio on low, an old habit, background noise for closing shifts. She poured herself a half cup of cold coffee. She picked up a rag and started wiping the already clean prep table. And she made herself breathe slowly and think about the expression on her face. Because the expression on her face was going to matter very much in the next few minutes. Tired, bored, slightly irritated at being kept late. That was the face she needed. The front door opened. She heard him before she saw him. Heavy boots on the tile, deliberate and unhurried. The walk of a man who had never once in his life needed to rush because rooms cleared for him on their own. She heard a second set of footsteps, then a third, fanning out through the diner like they already owned it. Chizara came out of the kitchen with her coffee cup. The man standing at the counter was not large the way Lorenzo was large. He was average in height, slim even, dressed in a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows. His hair was neat. His face was almost pleasant, even features, a mild expression, and that was the most frightening thing about him. He looked like an accountant. He looked like someone's older brother. He looked like nobody at all. But his eyes were the eyes of a person who had made decisions about other people's lives and had never lost a night of sleep over any of them. "We're closed," Chizara said. She let mild annoyance sit on top of the words like a thin coat of paint. "Sign's been off for 20 minutes. The man, Dante Russo, though she didn't know his name yet, only his type, looked around the diner slowly. His 2 men were moving along the walls, checking under tables, looking toward the kitchen door. "I'm looking for someone," Dante said. His voice was pleasant too. Conversational. A man. Tall, dark suit. He would have been bleeding. Chizara frowned. The small, confused frown of someone trying to be helpful and coming up empty. "A man came in about an hour ago," she said. "Sat right there." She pointed to the stool where Lorenzo had eaten, ordered coffee and left. "Didn't finish it. I was annoyed because I'd just made a fresh pot." Dante looked at the stool. He looked at the half-empty coffee cup she had placed there 30 seconds ago. He say anything? Asked if we had a payphone. She shrugged one shoulder. I told him nobody has a payphone anymore. He left. Dante was quiet. He was looking at her the way people look at a door, they're deciding whether to open. Testing the weight of it. Checking for cracks. Chizara sipped her cold coffee and looked back at him with the mild, uncomplicated patience of a woman who was tired and wanted to go home, and was used to difficult customers keeping her from it. Behind the kitchen door, 4 feet from a shelf of frozen meat, Lorenzo Ricci pressed the dish towels against his ribs and did not breathe. One of Dante's men moved toward the kitchen. Bathroom's that way if you need it, Chizara said, nodding in the opposite direction. Kitchen's off limits to customers. Health code. She said it the way she had said it 1,000 times. Flat, automatic. The words of a woman who had given this same speech to grabby strangers for years. The man stopped. Looked at Dante. Dante looked at Chizara one more time. She looked back at him over the rim of her coffee cup, steady and unremarkable and completely, convincingly bored. Check outside, Dante said quietly. His men moved toward the door. Dante followed, but slowly, and at the threshold he stopped and looked back at her once more. The way a man looks back when something isn't sitting right, but he can't find the exact reason why. Chizara was already rinsing her coffee cup. He came back 4 minutes later. Chizara had been counting. She had also been moving, quietly, quickly, doing the things a person does when they have very little time and need to use all of it. She had propped the kitchen door open just slightly, enough for sound to travel. She had loosened the cap on the steam vent pipe behind the prep table. The one that the landlord had been promising to fix for 8 months. The one that screamed like a kettle when the pressure built up and the cap wasn't fully sealed. She had checked on Lorenzo once, still upright, still breathing, color slightly better, and told him with her eyes to stay exactly where he was. Then she had walked back out front and picked up her rag. When the door opened, she was wiping the counter. Dante came in first this time, without the pleasant expression. He had left it somewhere in the parking lot, apparently, because what came through the door with him now was something much more honest. His 2 men followed, and a third she hadn't seen before, bigger than the other 2, who posted himself directly in front of the exit without being told to. Dante walked to the middle of the diner and stopped. Then he picked up the napkin holder from the nearest table and dropped it on the floor. Not threw it. Dropped it. Deliberately and without hurry, the way a person sets down a statement rather than an object. The napkins scattered across the tile like small white flags. I'm going to ask you differently this time, he said. Chizara stopped wiping the counter. She looked at the napkins on the floor, then at him. He's not here, she said. Dante moved to the next table. He swept the salt and pepper shakers off with one smooth motion of his forearm. Then the sugar dispenser. They hit the floor, and the sugar dispenser cracked open, spilling white across the tile. That's going to attract ants, Chizara said. Something shifted in Dante's face. It wasn't anger exactly. It was the mild surprise of a man who was not used to being spoken to as though he was an inconvenience. He crossed the room in 4 steps and stopped directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the careful way he had combed his hair that evening, which was a strange detail to notice. But her mind was collecting everything it could. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said quietly. I'm very tired, Chizara said. I've been on my feet since 10 o'clock. He studied her face. She held it carefully, not defiant, not afraid. Just worn out. Just a woman at the end of a long shift with flour on her apron and aching feet, too exhausted to be properly frightened. I'm going to search this kitchen, he said. You'll need to wait, Chizara said, and she moved. Not toward him. Sideways, toward the far end of the counter, reaching under it for the invoice clipboard she kept there. The one with the landlord's repair list attached to the back. She pulled it out and held it up without looking at it, because she had read it so many times she knew it by heart. The floor back there is 2 loose boards, she said, pointing toward the kitchen. The middle one rocks when you step on it wrong. I've been asking for repairs since March. If your man goes in heavy and goes down through the floor, that's not my problem, but I'll need his name for the incident report. Dante stared at her. From behind the kitchen door came a sharp, sudden shriek of pressurized steam from the vent, loud and metallic and startling, filling the diner for 3 full seconds before fading back to a low hiss. The big man by the door stepped back. One of the others swore. Dante did not move, but his eyes went to the kitchen door. The sound had rattled something in the room, shifted the air, interrupted whatever momentum he had been building. Old pipes, Chizara said, setting the clipboard down. The whole building needs work. You'd know that if you owned a place like this. She looked at him evenly. People with real money never do. It was a small needle. She hadn't been able to help it. Dante's jaw moved once. He turned to his men. Pull the kitchen apart. Chizara stepped to the left, directly onto the loose floorboard in the short hallway between the counter and the kitchen entrance. It rocked under her foot with a loud, uneven crack, and the man in front suddenly stumbled sideways into the shelving unit, sending a row of glass spice jars clattering to the floor. In the noise and confusion, Chizara's hand found the steam vent cap on the wall beside her. She twisted it. The shriek that followed was long and sharp and filled every corner of the room. Dante's men covered their ears. Dante himself stepped back, teeth clenched, composure finally cracking at the edges. And in the walk-in cooler, behind a wall of frozen meat, Lorenzo Ricci opened his eyes. The walk-in cooler was very quiet. Chizara had slipped back inside after Dante's men moved to the parking lot, buying them a few minutes at most before he came back. She already knew he was coming back. Men like that always came back. She had seen the way he'd looked at her at the door, that last, slow look of something unfinished, and she had used the minutes wisely, moving through the kitchen checking what she had and where it was. Now she stood in the cooler doorway, keeping watch through the kitchen window while Lorenzo sat against the back wall with the dish towels pressed to his side. The bleeding had slowed. His color was slightly better, which wasn't saying much, but it was something. "You need to tell me why you came here," she said quietly, not unkindly, but firmly. "The way you speak to someone when you have decided you deserve an answer and intend to wait for one." Lorenzo looked at the floor for a moment. Then he said, "My mother owned this diner." Chizara turned from the window. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the wall of the cooler, at the shelves, the old brackets, the pale painted concrete, with the expression of a man reading something written in a language he learned as a child and had spent years trying to forget. "Her name was Elena," he said. "She bought this place when I was 6 years old. Saved for 4 years to do it. She worked the morning shift herself every day. For 11 years. He paused. "She said a diner was the most honest business in the world. You gave people something real. Something warm. They gave you something back." He was quiet for a moment. "She died in this building. Heart attack, behind that prep table. The paramedics said she was probably already gone before she hit the floor." Chizara said nothing. She waited. "I was 22, Lorenzo continued. Already deep in things she didn't know about. Or maybe she knew and had decided not to say. He shifted slightly, winced, steadied himself. "After she died, I sold the building. I needed to. I told myself it was practical." He looked down at his hands. "It wasn't practical. I just couldn't stand to look at it." "But you came back," Chizara said. "I've come back 6 times in 18 years, he said. "I never go in. I just drive past. Or park across the street for a while." He exhaled slowly. "Tonight, I didn't have a choice about where I ended up. I was losing blood, and I needed to be off the street, and my body just..." He stopped. It just knew the way. Chizara looked at him for a long moment. At this man who moved rooms with his presence, and had left 3 of Dante's men unable to stand. Sitting in her walk-in cooler talking about his mother the way anyone talks about their mother. Carefully, around the edges. Because the center of it was still too tender to touch directly. "She would have fed you too," Chizara said. "If you'd come in with nothing." Lorenzo looked up. "She used to say," he started then stopped. Tried again. "She used to say that a person who feeds a stranger when they have very little themselves is richer than anyone who gives from abundance." He looked at Chizara steadily. "I hadn't thought about that in a long time. Until tonight." The kitchen window rattled slightly. Headlights swept across the wall. They were back. Chizara straightened and looked through the window. 2 of the SUVs had pulled around to the back alley. Dante was being thorough this time. "He's going to take the building apart," she said. "I know," Lorenzo said. He began carefully to stand. "This was your mother's kitchen," Chizara said. "Yes." She looked at the prep table. The steam vent. The deep fryer. The industrial shelves her landlord had bolted to the wall 11 years ago and never properly secured. She looked at all of it with fresh eyes. Not the eyes of a woman trying to protect a building, but the eyes of a woman protecting something that belonged to someone's mother. Something that had held warmth and work and honest purpose inside its walls for decades. That changed the feeling in her chest considerably. She picked up her keys from the hook. "Then we're not letting him have it," she said simply. Lorenzo looked at her. "No," he said quietly. "We're not." The cooler door swung open hard. Lorenzo came out low and fast, moving nothing like a man who had spent the last hour bleeding against a shelf of frozen meat. Pain had a way of sharpening some people, Chizara had heard. She understood that now. He was still pale, still favoring his left side, but his eyes were clear and focused and extremely cold. He took in the kitchen in one sweep. "How many?" he said. "3 in the front. Dante makes 4. Chizara was already moving toward the industrial shelf beside the deep fryer. "The big one is by the door." Lorenzo nodded. He picked up the heavy kitchen mallet from the prep table without breaking stride, weighing it once in his hand, then setting it back down. He needed something quieter. His eyes moved to the rag rack, the utility drawer. "Here," Chizara said. She pulled the pressurized soda canister from its bracket under the counter. A tall, heavy cylinder. The kind connected to the fountain machine by a rubber tube, kept at high pressure to push the syrup through the lines. She had disconnected the tube already. The valve on top was closed. Lorenzo looked at it, then at her. "The release valve faces forward when you aim it," she said. "It won't blind permanently, but it'll feel like it for long enough." He took the canister from her hands. "And this," she added, pulling a deep, wide ladle from the hook above the fryer. The fryer itself had been off since midnight, but the oil inside was still warm, thick and dark and heavy. Not hot enough to cause serious harm. Hot enough to matter. Lorenzo studied her face for a moment. "You've thought about this before," he said. Not an accusation. Almost something like respect. "I've worked alone in this kitchen for 2 years," Chizara said simply. "I've thought about a lot of things." She took the ladle. He took the canister. They looked at each other across the prep table, and something passed between them. Not a plan exactly, more like an understanding. A quiet agreement between two people who both knew what needed to happen and were ready to do their part. Lorenzo moved first. He pushed through the kitchen door low, staying beneath the sight line of the small window, and Chizara followed close behind, peeling left toward the counter while he went right along the wall. The front room was worse than she had left it. 2 of Dante's men had overturned the tables. The red vinyl stools had been knocked from their bolts. Her sugar dispenser was still cracked open on the floor, and someone had kicked through the glass of the pie display case, which made something sharp and sad move through Chizara's chest even now, even in this moment, because she had saved 3 weeks to buy that case. Dante was standing in the center of it all on the phone, speaking in a low and unhurried voice. He hadn't heard them come in. The lead guard, the big one from the door, was closest. He was facing the window, watching the parking lot, his back mostly to the room. Chizara caught Lorenzo's eye, tilted her head slightly toward the fryer ladle in her hand. Lorenzo gave one small nod. She moved along the counter, quiet in her rubber-soled work shoes. The ladle held low at her side. The guard was 3 steps away. 2. She swung the ladle in a clean, practiced arc. Not at his head, but forward, releasing the warm oil in a wide flat wave directly across his face and eyes. The sound he made was immediate and loud. Lorenzo was already moving. He came across the room fast. The canister raised and released the valve directly at the second guard who was spinning toward the noise. The pressurized gas hit the man square in the face, cold and forceful and blinding, and he went sideways into the overturned table, taking it down with him. The third man grabbed for Chizara. She dropped straight down, the way her father had once taught her to drop under a swinging arm, and the man's grip caught nothing but air. She rolled left, came up behind the counter, and her hand found the heavy ceramic mug rack on instinct. She threw the rack. It connected with the back of his knee, and he buckled. The room went briefly, strangely quiet. Dante lowered his phone. He looked at his 3 men, one clawing at his eyes on the floor, one gasping against the wall, one on one knee gripping his leg. Then he looked at Lorenzo, standing in the middle of the ruined diner with a soda canister in one hand and blood soaking slowly back through his shirt. Then he looked at Chizara, standing behind the counter in her work shoes with a broken mug rack in her hands and flour still on her apron. Something crossed his face that had never been there before. He reached for his jacket. Lorenzo stepped forward. "Don't," he said quietly, and the word landed in the room like a door closing. The 2 men looked at each other across the wreckage of the diner. It was a strange thing to watch, Chizara thought. The room was destroyed around them, tables overturned, Glass on the floor, sugar and oil, and the smell of pressurized gas still sharp in the air. And yet the two of them stood in the middle of it like the mess didn't exist. Like they had stepped into a room that contained only themselves and whatever had been building between them for however long it had been building. Dante's hand was still near his jacket. Lorenzo hadn't moved. "You look terrible," Dante said pleasantly. The easy manner was back, slipped on like a shirt. "How long have you been bleeding?" "Long enough," Lorenzo said. "You should have stayed down." Dante tilted his head slightly, almost sympathetic. "Whatever hole you crawled into after the warehouse, you should have stayed in it. This," he gestured at the room with one open hand, "didn't have to happen." "No," Lorenzo agreed. "It didn't." His eyes moved once, just once briefly, to the window behind Dante's left shoulder. Chizara followed his gaze without turning her head. The neon sign. It was dark, not flickering the way it had been all night, doing its tired on and off dance through the letters of Precious Bites Diner. It was simply off, fully dark. One of Dante's men had pulled it from the wall on his way in. She could see the bracket hanging loose, the wire dangling, and the sign itself was on the ground outside, face down on the wet asphalt. Something settled in Lorenzo's jaw. "That sign," he said quietly. "How long has it been up?" Chizara understood he wasn't asking her. She answered anyway. 11 years, she said. "My mother painted the lettering." The room was very still. Dante looked at the window, at the fallen sign, then back at Lorenzo. And for the first time something flickered in his careful eyes. Not guilt, because men like Dante didn't carry guilt, but recognition. The recognition of a man who has just understood, too late, which thing he should not have touched. "Sentimental," Dante said. But the pleasantness in his voice had gone thin. "No," Lorenzo said. He set the soda canister down on the nearest surface, slowly and deliberately, and straightened to his full height. The movement cost him. She could see it in the tightening around his eyes, but he didn't show it in any other way. Not sentimental, just clear. He crossed the room. What happened next was neither long nor loud. There was no speech, no drawn-out confrontation, no trading of threats back and forth the way such things happened in films. Lorenzo reached Dante in 4 steps, and Dante, to his credit or perhaps simply to his nature, did not run. He swung first, fast and precise. The movement of someone trained, rather than just violent. Lorenzo was faster. It was over in less than a minute. Dante went down on one knee, then both. Then his hands found the floor, and he stayed there, breathing in short, controlled bursts, making the quiet calculations of a man deciding whether he had anything left. He didn't. Lorenzo stood over him, his left hand pressed to his ribs, his right hand at his side. He looked down at Dante for a long moment, not with satisfaction, not with anger. Just with the steady, finished look of a man closing a chapter he had kept open too long. He didn't reach for a weapon. He stepped back. "Get your men and go," he said. "If I see your name again, it won't end this way." Chizara looked at Lorenzo. This surprised her more than anything else that had happened tonight. More than the SUVs. More than the steam vent. More than the oil in the canister and the ceramic mug rack. She had expected something final. Something that matched the weight of everything that had led to this moment. Instead, he had chosen to let the man walk. Dante got to his feet without help, which took some effort. He straightened his shirt. He looked at Lorenzo once more, then at Chizara, and whatever he saw in her expression, standing behind her broken counter in her flour-dusted apron, made him look away first. He left without speaking. His men followed, one limping, one still blinking oil from his eyes. The door swung shut. The diner was silent. Lorenzo turned and looked at Chizara. The cold, flat expression he had worn all through the confrontation was gone. What was underneath it was harder to describe, tired and old. And something that was not quite relief, but lived in the same neighborhood. He looked, she thought, like a man who had just put something down that he had been carrying for a very long time. "You should sit," she said. He didn't argue. He walked to the counter, slowly this time, and lowered himself onto the same stool where he had eaten his rice 3 hours ago, in a different version of this night. He pressed the dish towel to his ribs. He looked at the empty pie case, the scattered sugar, the broken mug rack on the floor. Then he looked at the dark window where the sign used to glow. "I'll fix it," he said quietly. "I know," said Chizara. She went to put the kettle on. Dawn came slowly, the way it does after hard nights. It didn't arrive with any particular brightness or drama. It just began, a pale gray softness at the edge of the sky. spreading gradually over the city like a clean cloth being laid over a table. The streetlights outside were still on, burning their yellow-orange against the growing light. Confused about whether the night was over, Chizara stood in the middle of her diner and looked at what remained. The tables could be righted. The stools could be rebolted. The sugar and the broken glass and the scattered napkins could be swept, and she would sweep them. Because that was what you did. You swept what could be swept, and you figured out the rest later. The pie display case was gone, but the counter was still standing. The coffee machine had survived. The kitchen, remarkably, was largely intact. The sign was still on the ground outside. She hadn't touched it yet. She wasn't ready to look at it up close. She poured 2 cups of tea from the kettle she had boiled and carried them to the counter. Lorenzo was still on his stool, his back straight, both hands wrapped around the warmth of the mug she had placed in front of him. He had stopped bleeding, or at least had slowed it enough to stop pressing the towel quite so hard. His eyes were on the window. They sat together in the particular quiet of people who have been through something and don't need to name it out loud. You should go to a hospital, Chizara said. I know a doctor, Lorenzo said. That's not the same thing. No, he agreed. But it's what I have. She looked at him from the side. In the gray early light, he looked different from the man who had walked in at 3 in the morning. Not softer exactly. The severity was still there, the careful eyes, the controlled stillness, but something in the architecture of his face had shifted slightly. Like a room where someone had opened one window. He reached into his jacket. She expected many things. She was not sure exactly what. What he placed on the counter was a plain white envelope, slightly creased, with no writing on the outside. What is this? She asked. Open it, he said. She did. Inside was a single document, several pages, dense with official language and small printed text, and various stamps and signatures in the places where stamps and signatures belonged. She read the top line twice because the first time didn't fully settle. It was the deed to the building. Not a copy. Not a letter of intent. The actual deed. Transferred and signed and dated. Dated 3 days ago, she noticed, which meant he had done this before he had ever walked through her door. Which meant something she couldn't entirely process yet. And at the bottom, in the space for the new owner's name, were 2 words. Chizara Precious. She set the document down on the counter very carefully, the way you set down something that might be fragile. The landlord, Lorenzo said. He owed me a debt. Now it's cleared. He paused. And mine to you is cleared. Chizara looked at the deed. At the stamps. At her own name in printed letters. You can't clear a debt with a building, she said. I just did. That's not how it works. It is tonight, he said quietly. She wanted to argue further. Because accepting things of this size from people she had known for one night went against every careful instinct she had built over 28 years of looking after herself. But she looked at his face. And she understood that this was not generosity in the way she had always been taught to be suspicious of, the kind that came with invisible strings and future favors owed. This was something else. This was a man paying a debt, he felt in his chest. In the part of him that had eaten jollof rice at 3 in the morning and been spoken to like a person for the first time in years. She picked up the deed and folded it gently back into the envelope. Lorenzo finished his tea. He stood slowly, straightening to his full height. And for a moment he simply stood there in the gray morning light of the damaged diner, looking at the counter, the stools, the kitchen door, the window. Taking the room in the way you take in something you want to remember accurately. Then he shrugged his jacket off. It was the blood-stained one, the expensive black one, ruined beyond saving at the left side. He folded it once and laid it over the back of the stool. He stood in his shirt, which was not in much better condition. But the gesture was clear. He was leaving the ruined thing behind. He walked to the door. Lorenzo, Chizara said. He stopped but didn't turn fully. Just enough. The rice, she said. Was it actually good? Or were you just being polite? A pause. Long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. It was the best thing I've eaten in 10 years, he said. He pushed through the door and walked out into the fog. Chizara watched him until the gray swallowed him completely. Which didn't take long. The city was good at that, taking people back into itself, folding them into its morning mist, and its early traffic, and its 10,000 ordinary sounds slowly returning one by one. She turned back to her diner. The envelope sat on the counter beside 2 empty mugs and a folded dish towel. The floor needed sweeping. The tables needed writing. The sign outside needed to be picked up and rehung, and she would need to find someone who could fix the bracket properly this time. Not the landlord's way, but her own way. Because it was her building now. She picked up the broom. She started at the far end, the way her mother had taught her. Work toward the door, not away from it. So you're always moving forward. Outside, the streetlights finally gave up and switched off. The city let the morning in.